The political landscape in Washington had never seen a week like this. Cameras flashed, reporters scrambled for quotes, and social media was on fire. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had officially filed a $100 million lawsuit against Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. The accusation? Defamation, obstruction, and a bombshell claim that he personally intervened to block crucial legislation tied to civil rights reform. News outlets couldn't keep up with the developments. Crockett's legal team moved swiftly, securing a court date that would place the Speaker himself on the witness stand. Legal experts and political analysts were stunned, not just by the size of the suit, but by the confidence with which it was being pursued. In her brief public statement, Crockett said only one thing: "This is not just about me. It's about the truth. And the truth will come out in court." That was all it took to set off a media firestorm. Meanwhile, behind closed doors in the Capitol, Johnson's allies were in full damage control. They issued a firm denial and accused Crockett of staging a political stunt. But privately, sources close to the Speaker said he looked more nervous than usual. The courtroom showdown was set. The political world held its breath. The morning of the trial, the federal courthouse in D.C. looked more like the red carpet at a Hollywood premiere. Protesters, supporters, journalists, and even a few politicians had shown up early, braving the heat to witness what many were calling the trial of the decade. Inside the courtroom, Jasmine Crockett sat poised and calm. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, she appeared unfazed by the flashing cameras and tense atmosphere. Her legal team, led by civil rights attorney Marcus Bell, looked equally confident. Mike Johnson entered minutes later, his expression tight, jaw clenched. Flanked by attorneys and Republican strategists, he avoided eye contact with Crockett entirely. Once the judge entered, the trial began without delay. Crockett's team wasted no time. In their opening statement, they laid out a detailed timeline of Johnson's alleged misconduct. They claimed he deliberately misrepresented Crockett's legislative work in public, leaked confidential documents to damage her credibility, and collaborated with political donors to shut down a bill she had championed. But then came the first twist. As part of their evidence, Crockett's team revealed they had subpoenaed Johnson's private text messages, and some of those texts were now public. One message read, "We bury her bill. Quietly. She'll never recover from this." The courtroom murmured. Even the judge paused. Johnson's legal team objected immediately, trying to have the texts dismissed. But it was too late, the seed of doubt had already been planted. And Jasmine? She didn't flinch. She just leaned forward slightly and whispered to her attorney. That was just the beginning, she said. The courtroom was still buzzing as Jasmine Crockett's team called their first witness, a former congressional staffer who had worked under Mike Johnson before resigning abruptly 6 months earlier. Sworn in under oath, the young aide, Daniel Reese, took a deep breath before speaking. "I didn't come here to make enemies," he said. "But I can't stay silent anymore." He testified that he had witnessed direct conversations where Johnson and senior aides discussed discrediting Crockett publicly, and intentionally blocking her legislative efforts behind the scenes. According to Reese, it wasn't just political opposition. It was personal. She was gaining momentum, he explained. And there was real concern from Speaker Johnson's office that her rising popularity would disrupt their control over key votes. The defense tried to rattle him during cross-examination, painting him as a disgruntled employee with a vendetta. But when Crockett's lawyer displayed an internal memo with Reese's name on it, one that referenced a strategic smear plan against Crockett, the courtroom froze. The judge raised an eyebrow. Even Johnson seemed momentarily shaken. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, networks broke into live coverage, and the public reaction was explosive. Hashtags like #Crockett vs. Johnson and #TrialTwist trended within the hour. But Jasmine Crockett remained focused. She had more than a lawsuit, she had a mission. The next witness was about to take the stand. And they would change everything. All eyes turned as the next witness entered the courtroom. To everyone's surprise, it wasn't a politician or a staffer, it was a high-ranking lobbyist named Carol Whitmore. Known for her deep connections on both sides of the aisle, Carol had worked behind the scenes in Washington for over 2 decades. She was no stranger to controversy, but her appearance here was completely unexpected. Even Mike Johnson's legal team looked caught off guard. Whitmore took the stand calmly, clutching a folder that she later revealed contained emails, meeting notes, and donor communication logs. "I was approached last year by Speaker Johnson's office," she began, her voice steady. "They asked for help in derailing a bill authored by Congresswoman Crockett. In exchange, certain donors promised significant favors, campaign funding, policy influence, committee leverage." The courtroom fell silent. Whitmore continued, explaining how she was instructed to use her network to quietly convince moderates and key Democrats to back away from the legislation, all under the guise of budget concern or timing issues. "But it was never about the bill's content," she said, looking directly at the judge. "It was about silencing her." Then came the real bombshell. She handed over a printed copy of an email. It was from a Johnson aide, dated 9 months earlier. The subject line read, "Neutralize Crockett before Q3." The judge allowed the document into evidence. Johnson's attorneys scrambled, whispering intensely. One of them even requested a recess, citing unexpected developments, but the judge denied the motion. Outside, news anchors were already calling this testimony a turning point in the trial. Some Republicans began quietly distancing themselves from Johnson, and behind closed doors, rumblings of pressure from within his own party had begun. Jasmine Crockett sat motionless. Focused. Composed. She knew what was coming next. Because tomorrow, she would take the stand. The next morning, the line to enter the courthouse stretched around the block. Everyone, from political insiders to everyday citizens, wanted to witness Jasmine Crockett take the stand. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Even the judge appeared unusually attentive as Crockett was sworn in. The courtroom was silent as she adjusted the microphone, looked out at the jury, and began. She didn't open with anger or outrage. Instead, she told a story. "I came to Congress to fight for people who've been ignored for too long. This isn't about political rivalry. This is about power, and how far some people are willing to go to keep it." Her voice was calm but carried weight. She detailed how, over the past year, she noticed her bills consistently being buried or delayed without explanation. She spoke of closed-door meetings she was excluded from, and press briefings where false narratives were fed to reporters. But then she got personal. "I received anonymous messages. Threats. Not just to my career, but to my safety. And I stayed silent for months because I believed in the system. But silence only empowered the ones who were working against me." Crockett's attorney displayed one final piece of evidence, an internal chat log between GOP strategists in Johnson's circle. The text read, "If she keeps talking, we'll make sure she doesn't last another term." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Johnson's lead attorney objected, arguing that the texts were taken out of context. But the judge overruled him, stating the messages were relevant and revealing. Crockett looked directly at Mike Johnson for the first time during her testimony. He didn't meet her eyes. "I don't need revenge," she said. "But I do need accountability. Because if this can happen to me, an elected member of Congress, what hope does the average person have?" The courtroom sat in stunned silence as she stepped down from the stand. The tide had turned. By the afternoon, headlines blared across the nation, "Crockett's testimony shakes Washington to its core." In Congress, the political fallout had already begun. A handful of Johnson's colleagues issued carefully worded statements, while others simply went dark on social media. Behind the scenes, GOP leadership reportedly held an emergency meeting. No one was denying the trial had become more than just a lawsuit, it was a test of political survival. Back in the courtroom, Mike Johnson's team had no choice but to respond. They called their first witness, Johnson's longtime advisor, Russell Kane, who had worked with him for over a decade. Kane attempted to dismiss the allegations as routine political tension and claimed the texts and emails had been taken out of context. But under cross-examination, Crockett's lawyer zeroed in on one crucial moment. Mr. Kane, did you or did you not approve language in a strategy memo that referred to Congresswoman Crockett's civil rights bill as, and I quote, a political threat to be neutralized? Kane hesitated. He looked to Johnson. Then back at the jury. Yes, he finally muttered. The courtroom stiffened. And you were aware that Speaker Johnson authorized that strategy? The attorney asked. I was acting under his direction, Kane admitted. That line sent shockwaves through the room. Jasmine Crockett sat quietly, not reacting, but she didn't need to. The momentum had swung. Jurors were visibly taking notes now, eyes narrowing. Outside, legal analysts began floating the idea that this trial could lead to an official ethics investigation into Johnson, or worse. But the biggest twist had yet to come. Because the judge had just approved a surprise witness. Someone from Mike Johnson's own inner circle. Whispers filled the courtroom as the judge confirmed the news: a surprise witness had been granted approval to testify. The doors opened. In walked Olivia Marks, Mike Johnson's former communications director, who had abruptly resigned 6 weeks prior without public explanation. Until now, no one knew why. The tension in the courtroom rose as she approached the witness stand. Johnson's team looked visibly shaken. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering frantically, but the judge called for silence. After being sworn in, Olivia took a moment, then spoke with clear, steady resolve. I didn't want to be here. I was loyal to Speaker Johnson for years. But what I witnessed went too far. She explained that she had been present in private strategy meetings where Johnson and his top aides specifically discussed targeting Crockett's reputation through selective media leaks, ghostwritten op-eds, and disinformation campaigns designed to paint her as erratic and unfit for office. Then she dropped the hammer. She pulled out a flash drive, already submitted into evidence, that contained audio recordings from one of those meetings. The judge played a short clip aloud. Johnson's voice rang through the courtroom: if we can't beat her with policy, we'll drown her with headlines. Feed the right story to the right outlet, and the public won't ask questions. The courtroom erupted. The judge had to call for order. Jurors stared at Johnson in disbelief. His lead counsel looked ghost pale. Crockett's team said nothing. They didn't need to. The evidence now spoke louder than any closing argument could. Outside, political commentators were already speculating: this trial could end Mike Johnson's career. This is no longer just a lawsuit, it's a reckoning. And inside the courthouse, Jasmine Crockett simply exhaled. By the end of the day, the tone in the courtroom had shifted completely. What had begun as a high-profile lawsuit now resembled a full-blown political takedown, not because of theatrics, but because of undeniable, documented evidence. The jury had seen emails, heard recordings, and watched witness after witness implicate Mike Johnson in a deliberate scheme. Still, Johnson's legal team wasn't ready to concede. The next morning, they put their client on the stand. It was a bold move, and a risky one. Under direct examination, Johnson tried to appear calm and measured. He denied personal involvement in any smear campaign, claiming the actions taken by his staff were misinterpreted and taken out of context. I never ordered anything illegal or unethical, he said. This is a political hit job disguised as a lawsuit. But when cross-examination began, things quickly unraveled. Crockett's lead attorney presented a timeline matching Johnson's statements to multiple contradicting pieces of evidence, including the now infamous audio clip and his aide's sworn testimony. Mr. Johnson, the attorney asked pointedly, do you expect this jury to believe that every member of your team, from your strategist to your communications director, acted without your direction, yet all coincidentally targeted one person, Jasmine Crockett? Johnson hesitated. I didn't micromanage every discussion. The attorney leaned in. But you did benefit from the damage done to her. You helped kill her bill. You watched her reputation take hits from false leaks. And you never once spoke up. That's not ignorance, Mr. Johnson. That's complicity. Silence. The jury looked on, stone-faced. Outside the courthouse, protests had grown. Supporters of Crockett held signs reading, "Truth Matters," and "We Stand with Jasmine." Meanwhile, calls for Johnson's resignation began trending online. Reporters huddled near the steps, waiting for the final phase. Because tomorrow, closing arguments would begin. And the jury would soon decide the fate of the most powerful man in Congress. The courtroom was packed tighter than ever. Reporters filled every available seat, cameras waited outside for any glimpse of movement, and millions of Americans tuned in to live-stream coverage of the final phase of the trial, closing arguments. Jasmine Crockett's attorney, Marcus Bell, stood first. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. This case isn't just about texts, recordings, or office politics. It's about a line being crossed, a powerful figure abusing his influence to destroy a public servant's reputation for daring to speak up. He paced slowly, letting his words settle. You've seen the evidence. You've heard the voices. And you know that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a campaign. A calculated, coordinated effort to silence a rising voice in Congress, not because she lied, but because she told the truth. He turned toward the jury. You don't have to like politics to see what this was. You just have to care about integrity. Then came the defense. Johnson's lead attorney tried to regain control. He argued that politics had always been messy, that strong disagreements were part of the democratic process. He painted Crockett as an opportunist trying to build her brand through legal spectacle. But the jury didn't look convinced. Not after hearing hours of damning evidence. Not after watching Mike Johnson struggle on the stand. The defense's closing statement ended without applause or reaction. And just like that, the judge gave the final instructions to the jury. 12 men and women were now tasked with answering the question that had consumed the nation for weeks: was Mike Johnson responsible for defaming and obstructing Jasmine Crockett, and did he owe her $100 million in damages? The jury was dismissed to deliberate. And as the courtroom emptied, Jasmine Crockett stood near the exit, surrounded by supporters. She wasn't smiling. Not yet. Because the verdict was coming. And it would change everything. The nation held its breath. For nearly 8 hours, the jury remained behind closed doors. Speculation ran wild, legal experts debated possible outcomes on every major network, politicians weighed in anonymously, and hashtags like #CrockettVerdict and #JusticeOnTrial flooded every corner of the internet. Inside the courthouse, Jasmine Crockett sat with her legal team, silent and focused. Mike Johnson sat across the room, stiff and expressionless. The tension between them was thick enough to slice with a knife. Then, at precisely 5:42 p.m., the courtroom doors opened. The jury had reached a verdict. Everyone stood as the foreperson handed the written decision to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. The judge looked over the document, then read aloud, "In the matter of Crockett versus Johnson, we the jury find in favor of the plaintiff." Gasps echoed. An award compensatory and punitive damages in the amount of $102.5 million. The courtroom exploded. Reporters scrambled for their phones. People shouted, cried, hugged, and Mike Johnson sat frozen, his world visibly collapsing in real time. Crockett remained still for a moment, blinking slowly. Then she stood. Her lawyer placed a hand gently on her back. Applause erupted from her supporters as she exited the courtroom with dignity, no celebration, just quiet resolve. Outside, cameras captured her first words: "This victory isn't just mine. It belongs to every voice they tried to silence. Let this be a message: truth still matters." Meanwhile, the fallout for Johnson began instantly. Within an hour, multiple members of Congress called for an ethics investigation. 2 sponsors pulled out of his re-election campaign. Party leaders refused to comment. But the biggest shock came the next morning. When Mike Johnson announced his resignation from Congress, the sun had barely risen when the news broke. Speaker Mike Johnson resigns following $100 million court defeat. It wasn't just a political headline, it was a seismic moment in American history. No sitting speaker had ever fallen like this, toppled not by scandal in the shadows, but by a courtroom and a congresswoman who refused to be silenced. Standing at the Capitol steps just hours later, Jasmine Crockett addressed the press one final time. "There are people who told me not to do this," she said, her voice firm but steady. "They said it would be career suicide, that I was too young, too bold, too loud. But I've learned something: silence never protects the right people. Only truth does." Reporters asked whether she would pursue further action in Congress. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "I didn't take on this fight to tear someone down. I did it to lift up the truth, and now it's time to get back to work for the people who sent me here." The public response was overwhelming. Supporters gathered outside her office with flowers and signs. Civil rights leaders praised her courage. Even critics admitted, off the record, that she had done something rare, not just winning a legal battle, but shifting the tone of political accountability in Washington. In the weeks that followed, Crockett's approval ratings soared. She was invited to speak on national stages, interviewed by major networks, and even approached about future leadership roles within her party. But Jasmine stayed focused. Her next bill, the same civil rights legislation Johnson once tried to kill, was reintroduced, and this time, it gained immediate bipartisan support. Because now, her voice wasn't just heard. It echoed. Weeks after the trial ended and Johnson's resignation made history, the ripple effects were still unfolding. Congress had changed. Whispers of reform turned into action. A new bipartisan ethics panel was formed, and proposed legislation aiming to protect whistleblowers and prevent political retaliation began making its way through committees, led, of course, by Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. But while the headlines moved on, Jasmine didn't. She returned to her district, where town halls overflowed with people, not just voters, but citizens who felt, for once, that justice wasn't out of reach. In one now viral moment, a teenage girl stood during a Q&A and asked, "How did you stay strong when the whole system was against you?" Crockett smiled, then replied, "Because the system only wins if we stay quiet. And I knew, even if I stood alone, I wasn't wrong." Her words sparked thunderous applause. Across the country, her story became a symbol of something bigger, that power could be challenged, that truth could prevail, and that a woman who refused to back down could shake the highest levels of government. And as the next election cycle approached, one question echoed louder than the rest: was Jasmine Crockett just getting started?